and during the whole of the period when it was producing this report, which was published as long ago as January this year. It seems much fresher than that, but it was in fact published in January of this year. And I think I speak on behalf of all members of the committee in thanking her for her work and for the way in which she has welded us together as an irresistible, inquisitive force trying to understand the workings of the various aspects of society that come within our purview. In producing this report, we started from some common ground, and the first element in that is that there are too few homes for the population in this country, too few homes for those who wanted them, but also that not all of the homes are necessarily the right homes to meet demand in terms of size and so forth, and the necessary amenities, nor are they all in the right place. And I think we all started with a common view that building more homes was at least a very important part of the solution to that problem. Now, the government has a target, it has set itself, of seeing 300,000 homes built per annum. It's sometimes said that the government has promised to build 300,000 homes to be built by the private sector. Now, that figure is obviously an approximation, and it's what I would describe as a stretch target. And there's nothing wrong with setting yourself a stretch target as a tool for motivating effort, provided, of course, it is understood as such. In the current year, the government, or I should say the industry, expects to be on track to deliver, to build approximately 240,000 new homes. Although that figure is less than 300,000, it is nonetheless not to be regarded in any way as a failure. But our report focused, with that common background, on looking at the barriers to increasing the number of homes being delivered per annum and bringing it closer to that 300,000 figure. And inevitably, in such a long report, I am going to be selective about the items that I draw the House's attention to that are in the report, in the interests of time, hoping that other members of the committee whom I see here in the chamber and who are likely due to speak will perhaps alight upon other issues that they will bring to the House's attention as well. So I intend fundamentally to focus on three issues. One of them is on the house builders themselves, and I'm not intending in what I am about to say to mean any criticism of them at all. They are the large house builders, the ones who do the volumes that we need, are relatively few in number. And they do not have the capacity, neither financial nor in terms of personnel, to ramp up the number of houses they're building every year on the scale that the government would necessarily hope for. There are difficulties in becoming a large house builder. It is an industry that has barriers to entry. One needs to have the land, and one needs to have the resources, and one needs to have, and I'll come to this in a moment, the skills necessary to negotiate the planning system in order to get the permissions that allow one to build large developments. And one of our recommendations was that everything should be done to encourage more small house builders to help take up the slack. We noted that the number of small house builders over the last 2 decades had declined, and the share of the new build market they were responsible for was probably at its smallest level for a very long time indeed. So one of the things we want to see is more encouragement for smaller house builders, partly to add to the diversity of the housing stock available to members of the public looking for a new home, but also in the hope that some of the small house builders might, over time or even quite rapidly, become large house builders so that they are able to offer some competition and spur to the existing large house builders. Now, that does bring us to planning. I've already mentioned the expense and the complexity of obtaining planning permission. Certainly when it comes to the smaller house builders, one has to reckon with and take into account the fact that a substantial amount of money has to be put up in advance at risk as one seeks planning permission. Leaving aside the cost of the land itself, which one could take an option on, the fact is that the design, the architectural work, the necessary studies, the environmental impact assessments, and so forth, together with the planning fees, represent a significant upfront investment, which may never be recovered if it turns out that the application is simply doomed to fail. And that is a significant deterrent and part of the barriers to entry that I mentioned that prevent smaller house builders offering more competition to the large ones. But overall, even in relation to large house builders, the committee found that delays in the planning system and uncertainty over planning reform had a chilling effect on house building. We also found that in a plan-led system, such as we have had for development, a plan-led system for development, such as we've had in this country really since the end of the Second World War through the Town and Country Planning Act, the system does not work, or it does not work well, unless there are local plans in place that are up to date and that are relevant to the needs of the local area and to the forecast demand for homes. And we found that local plans need to be simpler, clearer, and more transparent. And in that regard, we look forward, and we have been looking forward for some time, to the levelling up and to scrutinising the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and hope to see reform of local plan making in that bill. We were also, in relation to planning, particularly concerned about the government's wish to move further away from Section 106 payments in the direction of an infrastructure levy. Now, we appreciate that if an infrastructure levy can be a simpler method of calculating the contribution to be expected from a developer, simpler than Section 106, that is an attraction. Our concern is not that. Our concern is that Section 106 contributions by law must be relevant to the development which is taking place. So if money is paid in order to contribute to or provide a primary school for a large new development, the contribution is tied to that primary school, and one can be reasonably confident it is going to be delivered, whereas our understanding of the infrastructure levy is that the local authority can simply take the money and it becomes part of their general funds, and the connection with the development and therefore with providing the amenities necessary to support the development is lost. So we would like to see some sort of assurance in that respect. We also noticed, and here I move to my third point, which is in relation to skills, we also noted that planning departments in local authorities up and down the country lack sufficient skills in the planning area to process the applications coming towards them and to assessing the very complex factors that are increasingly loaded on planning applications. So if we are to have a plan-led system and the government is to insist on a certain level of complexity, it really is incumbent on the government to try and ensure that there are sufficient planning officers with the right skills available in order to process them so that development can actually take place. But in relation to house building, it's worth moving on to skills in the construction sector as well, and that is the point on which I'm really going to conclude. It's fair to say, my lords, that the skilled trades necessary for the traditional method of house building have been in decline for quite a long time now, well over a decade, possibly even longer. And that is why, well before we thought about Brexit, the phrase "the Polish plumber" had become almost standard in our language. We had already been responding by encouraging immigration into those in relation to those skilled trades. We had been responding to a decline in local availability of those skills that was long-standing. When we come to, and that was long before Brexit, the lack of plumbers and so forth, carpenters, has not been produced by Brexit. It was already there. What Brexit has done, of course, is change the arrangements in regard to the use of immigration in order to make up the shortfall. Now, in this respect, it has to be asked whether constantly importing skilled trades from the European Union was a sustainable and feasible response over the long term to the solution anyway, to the problem anyway, especially given the fact that many of the countries from which they were coming were themselves becoming richer and had a demand for that labour at home as well. We therefore think it behoves the industry to consider automation and new methods of building alongside the traditional methods and perhaps taking their place, including automation, innovation, and modular housing. And it struck us, really, that modular housing is one of those things which has been promised for many years, but has never quite taken off. And we believe the government should be looking closely at that and trying to understand why the many words that have been spoken about it, have not actually turned into the revolution in house building that we might have expected. Now, my Lords, many hands have gone into the making of this report. I'm grateful to all of the members of the committee who attended so many evidence sessions and undertook visits and made such a great contribution. I've already mentioned our thanks to my noble friend, Lady Neville Rofe. I should express thanks to our specialist advisor, who looked after us throughout, Professor Paul Cheshire, Emeritus Professor of Economic Geography at the LSE. I want to thank all of the clerks and the other House staff who supported us in producing the report. I'm probably going to break some terrible taboo in your Lordship's House by mentioning our lead clerk by name, Dee Goddard, and giving her a special vote of thanks because she has looked after the committee since its inception, and she is leaving the service of the House in a couple of weeks' time in order to relocate with her family to another part of the country. So a special word of thanks to her as I sit down and commend this report to your Lordship's House.
The question is that this motion be agreed to.